Welcome to Starbound. My name is Aram. I'll be your narrator for today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and just allows our videos to show up on your feed more often.
The universe?
Dr. Elena Santos gestured expansively at the holographic display behind her.
Is filled with wonders beyond counting. For each mystery solved, 10 more wait to be unraveled.
Her weathered face lit up with genuine enthusiasm as she addressed the packed lecture hall.
Just last month, the Centauri expedition uncovered ruins that predate any known civilization. The artifacts they found challenge everything we thought we knew about the development of faster-than-light travel.
A student raised his hand. But Dr. Santos, haven't the Mithrani had FTL for millennia? How could there be older ruins? Elena smiled, gray streaked hair falling across her face as she leaned forward on her podium.
Exactly the right question to ask. The Mithrani are indeed the oldest known spacefaring species, but these ruins...
She trailed off as a strange sensation washed over her, like static electricity dancing across her skin. The holographic display flickered and went dark. Through the lecture hall's windows, she saw massive shapes materializing in the sky, gleaming silver vessels that seemed to flow like liquid metal, stretching for kilometers across the city skyline. Similar ships appeared simultaneously at every major population center across Earth. A voice echoed in her mind, somehow perfectly clear despite not being spoken aloud. Greetings, children of the galaxy. We have returned to evaluate your progress and decide which among you is worthy to inherit our legacy. The message repeated in every mind across the galaxy, in every language, reaching every sapient species simultaneously. The precursors had arrived. Hours later, Elena sat in her office reading the message that had appeared on her tablet. Dr. Elena Santos, selected as scientific representative of humanity. Similar messages had gone out across Earth, choosing 10 individuals to represent different aspects of human civilization. Her son, Ren, had been selected as the diplomatic representative, much to both their surprise. The others included Command Representative Julia Connors, a decorated fleet admiral, Cultural Representative Michael Okonjo, a renowned artist and philosopher, Engineering Representative Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Medical Representative Dr. James Wilson, Education Representative Maria Garcia, Agriculture Representative Dr. Wei Shin, Digital Systems Representative Dr. Aisha Patel, and Protection Representative Colonel Zhao Zhang. Mom? Ren's voice came from the doorway. He rushed over after the message, taking an express shuttle from Station Delta in orbit. He entered, his dark skin seeming to absorb the office's harsh lighting. Have you seen the full list of selections for the other species? Elena nodded, pulling up the data already collected and published by several news sources. The Mithrani delegation was led by Ambassador Thek Sul, their diplomatic representative, along with 9 others chosen to showcase their species' achievements over millennia of spacefaring civilization. The hyper-intelligent Ku Loth had sent High Scholar Ji Nan as their scientific representative, leading their own delegation of 10. Every major spacefaring race had received the same treatment. 10 representatives selected not by their own governments or councils, but by the precursors themselves. The selection seemed designed to capture the essence of each civilization, from the warrior philosophers of the Ardathi to the cybernetic hive minds of the Vor Collective. What I don't understand, Ren said, absently running a hand over his close-cropped hair, is why they chose me. I'm just a logistics officer on Station Delta. There are hundreds of more qualified diplomats. Elena smiled at her son.
Maybe that's exactly why they chose you. You spend your days helping people from different species work together and solve practical problems. That's real diplomacy, not just formal negotiations.
Their conversation was interrupted by another message. Their transport had arrived. A strange shuttle, looking like a blank featureless pill, but with a surface rippling with strange waves and patterns. It seems the precursors understand the difficulty that some species might have with accepting their selections, and have sent chauffeurs to each. The station defied conventional physics. Its liquid metal surface flowed in constant patterns, corridors and chambers forming and reforming as needed. Elena found it fascinating that they could walk normally on what appeared to be a fluid surface, though she had little time to study the phenomenon as they were led to a vast central chamber where other species delegations were already gathering. The assembled representatives were a stunning display of galactic diversity. The towering Mithrani, with their gleaming biotechnology, stood near the floating gas bag-like forms of the Kuloth. The flowery Ardathi curled in their branches and vines, while the cybernetic Vor moved in perfect synchronization. Each delegation carried itself with the pride of a species that had mastered the stars. Ambassador Thek-Sul's voice carried across the chamber.
Even the primitives were invited. How quaint.
Several other delegations made similar dismissive comments, though Elena noticed that some, like the Ardathi, seemed genuinely curious about humanity's inclusion. She was too focused on studying the station's fascinating architecture to pay much attention to the political posturing, but Rin's steadying hand on her shoulder reminded her of her diplomatic duties.
"Mom," he whispered, "you're doing it again. I'm sure the wall is very interesting, but there are other people here, you know."
She smiled sheepishly.
"Sorry. It's just, look at how the ripples interact. The whole station could be alive in a way. The precursors could be talking to us right now and we don't even realize it."
The gathered delegations fell silent as they awaited their mysterious host's arrival. Whatever trials lay ahead would determine the fate of their species, but Elena just couldn't take her eyes away from the scene itself, gazing in wonderment without a care in the world. A collective gasp filled the chamber as a massive form emerged from the liquid metal walls. Primary observer Cole Tret's silver-scaled body coiled through the air in a distinctly draconic shape, complete with 4 clawed limbs and elongated neck. Their head bore an array of swept-back horns that rippled like wind-blown mercury. Despite their intimidating size, they moved with impossible grace that seemed to defy gravity.
"Welcome, children of the stars."
Cole Tret's thoughts resonated in every mind. Ripples cascaded across their metallic scales in time with each word.
You stand here as representatives of your species, chosen for embodying their quintessential traits.
A smaller precursor materialized beside them, forming a revolving cascade of metallic droplets roughly shaped like a humanoid.
"I am Trial Administrator Val Resch,"
they projected, their liquid surface creating intricate patterns.
"The first trial begins now."
The floor rippled as identical boxes of interlocking metal rose up in front of each species delegation. The boxes were simple cubes, about half a meter on each side, their surfaces shifting in mesmerizing patterns similar to the station walls.
"You have one standard rotation," Val Resch explained. "Each failure will reset the timer and alter the puzzle's nature. Begin."
Elena's eyes lit up as she circled their box, practically bouncing with excitement.
"This is incredible! Look at how the patterns flow! It's like watching a pond in a rainstorm!"
The Mithrani delegation had already deployed an array of sophisticated scanning equipment. Ambassador Thek-Sul supervised as their engineering representative accessed centuries of accumulated knowledge through their neural interfaces.
"This is hardly a challenge for beings of our advancement," they declared.
"Dr. Santos?"
Dr. Tanaka asked.
"Should we set up our scanning equipment as well?"
Elena was too absorbed in watching the patterns shift to respond immediately.
"What? Oh, no! I want to see what it does first. This is the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. Did you see how the surface ripples match the ones we saw in the hallway?
The Ku-Loth approached their box with cold calculation. High scholars Ji Nan's neural patterns dancing visibly through their translucent membrane as they analyzed the puzzle. Meanwhile, the human delegation gathered around their box like children at a museum exhibit, pointing out interesting details to each other. "Look at this part," Ren said, gesturing to a particularly complex pattern. "Doesn't it remind you of those aurora videos from Earth?" Dr. Patel leaned in closer. "You're right. And when it shifts like this, it's almost like watching waves in the ocean." The Mithrani's first attempt triggered a reset, the box's patterns changing completely. Their second attempt yielded similar results. With each failure, the patterns grew more complex.
Impossible, Ambassador Thexul declared after their fifth attempt. We have mastered physics. This must be rigged. Their biotechnology pulsed with agitation. Elena barely noticed, too engrossed in studying how the box responded to different approaches. She touched it gently, gasping in delight as ripples spread from her fingertips.
It's like it's playing with us. Every time it changes, it creates new patterns to explore.
Playing? High scholars Ji Nan drifted closer, their inner patterns shifting rapidly. This is a serious evaluation of our species' worth, not some childish game.
Why can't it be both?
Elena asked, eyes still fixed on the swirling patterns.
Just look at it. Isn't it beautiful? Who cares if we solve it or not? We're getting to study actual precursor technology up close.
The Ku-Loth made a dismissive sound and floated away, but Elena noticed the surface of Valresh's draconic face ripple and shift into something of a smile. Ambassador Thexul's patience finally broke.
We will not continue this farce. The Mithrani Empire has stood for millennia. We will not be made fools of by some ancient relics.
They stormed from the chamber. His loss, Ren shrugged. Hey, what happens if we try this? He reached out to touch a particular pattern, triggering another reset. But rather than frustration, his face showed only curiosity about what new patterns would emerge. The timer reset again as another attempt failed. Elena leaned in closer, wondering what mysteries these dancing patterns might reveal. Whether they solved the puzzle or not seemed far less important than the sheer joy of discovering something new with each attempt. Hours into the trial, the number of participating delegations had dwindled. The Mithrani's dramatic exit sparked a cascade of withdrawals as representative after representative decided they would rather preserve their dignity than continue failing at an apparently impossible task. But the human delegation remained absorbed in their exploration, their earlier excitement undiminished. Elena had taken to sketching the more striking patterns simply because they were beautiful, while Dr. Okonjo compared them to various art styles from Earth's history. This sequence here, he pointed to a particularly intricate flow, reminds me of traditional Japanese wave paintings.
And look at how it transitions,
Dr. Garcia added.
It's almost like watching a dance.
Their genuine enthusiasm seemed to puzzle the remaining delegations. The Ardathi's plant-like forms swayed in contemplation as they observed the humans' continued fascination despite repeated failure. The Vor Collective's synchronized movements had grown increasingly erratic as their shared consciousness struggled to process the puzzle's apparent impossibility. High scholar Ji Nan had been watching the humans with growing suspicion. Their translucent membrane pulsed with agitation as they finally spoke.
This is absurd. How are you primitives getting closer to solving it than we are?
Elena looked up from her sketch, surprised.
Are we? Oh,
Don't play innocent.
Ji Nan's internal neural patterns flashed rapidly.
Each of your attempts progresses further before triggering a reset. You must be cheating somehow.
Admiral Connors stepped forward, her voice firm but calm.
High Scholar, we're just exploring the puzzle like everyone else. We have no special advantage here.
Lies. Your species is barely out of its evolutionary cradle. You cannot have insight that eludes the Kuloth's superior intellect.
Elena turned back to study the box, a thought suddenly striking her.
Maybe that's exactly why we're making progress. We're not trying to solve it.
She watched the patterns shift, remembering an earlier observation about how the box seemed to be playing. The box wasn't just a puzzle to be solved.
Look at how it responds differently to each approach,
she said, more to herself than the others.
When the Mithrani tried to analyze it systematically, it became more complex. When the Vor attempted to process it through their hive mind, it generated chaotic patterns. Those aren't random changes, it's actively thwarting us.
The Kuloth's dismissive response was cut short as Val Resh approached their delegation. The precursor's liquid metal form rippled with what might have been interest as they observed the human's latest attempt. Elena continued, her excitement building.
Every time we trigger a reset, the new patterns incorporate elements of what we just tried, but not to prevent us from succeeding. It's learning from us while we learn from it. The puzzle isn't about finding the right solution at all.
What do you mean, Mom?
It's about the approach itself. The box doesn't want to be solved, it wants to be explored. Each reset isn't a failure, it's an invitation to discover something new.
As if in response to her words, the box's patterns shifted into their most complex configuration yet. But instead of trying to decipher it, Elena simply watched in wonder, appreciating the sheer beauty of its ever-changing surface. High Scholar Ji Nan's inner patterns twisted in frustration.
Nonsense. They said this was a test. There must be a correct solution.
Must it?
Elena asked softly, still captivated by the flowing patterns.
Maybe the real test is whether we can let go of that assumption and just appreciate the mystery.
Before Ji Nan could respond, a chime sounded throughout the chamber. The first trial had ended. No delegation had solved the puzzle, but as Val Resh collected the boxes, their surface rippled in what was unmistakably satisfaction.
The second trial will begin shortly,
they announced, their thoughts carrying a warmth that hadn't been present before. Elena shared an excited look with her son. They might not have won in any traditional sense, but they had learned so much, and that was a win in their book. The chamber's liquid metal walls flowed outward, expanding the space until it stretched beyond sight. New walls rose from the floor, forming twisted corridors that branched and merged in impossible patterns. The entire structure rippled and shifted like mercury in a kaleidoscope.
The second trial,
Val Resh announced, their humanoid form casting dancing reflections across the metallic surfaces,
is navigation. The exit to this labyrinth is at its center. Be warned, the paths will change as you progress.
Various species immediately deployed sophisticated mapping technology. The Vor Collective sent synchronized drones in every direction, while the Kuloth released floating sensor arrays. Even the remaining Ardathi, typically more interested in harmony than technology, produced devices to track their position. Ren looked at the sprawling maze thoughtfully. We should split up into teams, cover more ground that way.
Good thinking,
Admiral Connors agreed.
But how do we stay in contact when the maze keeps changing? Our communicators still work,
Dr. Patel noted, checking her device.
We can share what we learn even if we get separated.
They divided into 3 groups. Elena, Dr. Tanaka, and Dr. Wilson took the left path. Ren led Colonel Zhang and Dr. Okonjo down the center. Admiral Connors, Dr. Patel, Dr. Garcia, and Dr. Shen took the right. Elena's group had barely gone 50 meters when the walls shifted, cutting them off from the others. But rather than panic, she found herself fascinated by how the liquid metal flowed.
Just look at it! The patterns are similar to the puzzle box, just on a much larger scale.
Focus, Mom. Ren's voice came through her communicator, tinged with amusement. We're supposed to be finding the center.
But getting lost is half the fun. How often do we get to explore an ever-changing maze made of living metal?
A frustrated shout echoed from somewhere nearby. One of the Kuloth representatives had apparently hit another dead end. Elena's team rounded a corner just in time to see High Scholar Ji Nan's floating form disappear behind a newly formed wall. Team 2 here, Ren's voice crackled. We just hit our third dead end, but I noticed something interesting. The walls don't shift randomly or according to some preset pattern. They respond to our movements also like the box.
Team 3 confirming the same,
Admiral Connors reported.
The maze is actively trying to separate us.
Elena watched another wall flow into a new configuration.
Not separate, scatter. It wants us to see every part of the maze.
That's great, Mom, but how does it help us reach the center?
Perhaps it doesn't, Dr. Wilson suggested. Remember the puzzle boxes? Maybe this isn't about reaching the center. Elena's eyes lit up.
The journey matters more. The other delegations are right, in a way. Compared to the precursors, we're all primitive monkeys. That might be the real reason they summoned mostly scientists and engineers instead of world leaders. I'm more interested in learning what we can while we're here than trying to win a lost cause.
As if to prove her point, they heard more sounds of frustration. The Vor Collective's drones had apparently lost synchronization, their carefully plotted routes rendered useless by the maze's constant changes. The Kuloth's sensor arrays provided perfect data about their current position, but couldn't predict where walls would appear next. The human teams continued sharing observations, not about paths to the center, but about the maze itself, how certain patterns predicted upcoming changes, how the walls flowed differently depending on who was nearby. They built a growing understanding of the labyrinth's behavior, even as they remained thoroughly lost within it.
Did you notice the reflections changing just before every wall shift?
Dr. Patel asked over the comm.
The maze is telegraphing itself. And look at these ripples,
Elena added excitedly.
They're similar to the ones we saw on Coltreth's scales. The whole maze might be alive in the same way we are. We could be walking on precursors.
A chime sounded, signaling the end of the trial. No delegation had reached the center, but as the maze walls flowed back and the interior returned to the original open chamber, Elena noticed Val Resch and Coltreth exchanging what looked remarkably like amused glances. The human teams regrouped, energetically sharing stories about all the fascinating things they discovered while wandering the living labyrinth. Elena couldn't help noticing how the other species representatives watched them with a mixture of confusion and growing curiosity.
I cannot understand you humans, High Scholar Ji Nan said, drifting closer. You failed to reach the objective, yet you act as though you've achieved something meaningful.
Elena smiled.
We ought to explore a maze made of living metal that reshapes itself. How is that not meaningful? Whether we reached the center or not, we learned so many amazing things.
But what purpose does such knowledge serve if it does not lead to success?
Who says it didn't? Ren asked. We may not have reached the center, but when we all go home, we'll have centuries worth of knowledge to share. Just knowing that something is possible is enough to find ways to achieve it. Humanity could never have gotten to where it is today if we didn't have your example to study. Now we have theirs. Val Resch's surface rippled in what Elena was beginning to recognize as approval. Whatever these trials were truly testing, she suspected it had very little to do with reaching designated goals. But she kept that thought to herself as they waited to hear what the next challenge would bring. A sphere of pure energy materialized in the chamber's center, its surface rippling with colors that seemed to occasionally shift outside the human visible spectrum. Unlike the precursor's fluid metal forms, this being appeared almost incorporeal, more like a soap bubble filled with an aurora borealis than any kind of solid matter.
The third trial, Val Resch announced, is communication.
The remaining delegations once again immediately deployed an array of sophisticated equipment. The Kuloth's sensor arrays probed the entity with every known form of radiation. The Vor Collective attempted to establish digital protocols across multiple frequencies. The Ardathi tried generating harmonic resonances to match the being's oscillating patterns. Elena watched the entity drift lazily through the air, trailing wisps of ethereal light.
"It's beautiful," she breathed. "Like a jellyfish made of starlight."
The entity paused in its meandering path, pulsing briefly brighter.
"Did you see that?" Ren asked. "It heard you."
Not the words, though, Dr. Okonjo noted. The translator didn't activate. It reacted to her tone, her genuine appreciation. The Kuloth's increasingly aggressive scanning seemed to make the entity drift away, while the Vor's rigid signal patterns were simply ignored. But when Elena laughed in delight at a particularly spectacular color shift, it swooped closer to the human delegation.
"It's like watching a puppy,"
Dr. Garcia observed.
"or maybe a very young child."
The humans began moving around the chamber, watching how the entity followed their movements. When they raised their arms, it would drift higher. When they crouched down, it would sink lower. Soon, they were playing an impromptu game of follow the leader with the cosmic being.
This is highly irregular, High Scholar Jinan protested. You cannot establish meaningful communication through such primitive behaviors.
But Elena noticed how the entity's colors shifted to match their clothing when they got close, how it would mirror their gestures with undulating tendrils of light.
"Why not? It's clearly trying to interact with us. Maybe sophisticated technology isn't the answer. Maybe we just need to show it we want to play too."
Dr. Okonjo began humming an old lullaby, and the entity's surface rippled in time with the melody. Dr. Patel traced patterns in the air with her hands, which the being would recreate in trails of light. Even Colonel Zhang got into the spirit, teaching it a simple clapping game that it reproduced with pulses of energy.
This is absurd, High Scholar Jinan declared. You are treating a potentially transcendent cosmic entity like a toy.
No, like a child, Ren suggested. One who's curious about us and wants to learn through play. Isn't that how most intelligent beings start out? The entity drifted between them as they spoke, its colors shifting rapidly. When Jinan's agitation made her neural patterns flash, it responded by generating similar flickering patterns, but in a softer, almost questioning way. Elena's eyes widened.
"It's not just copying us. It's trying to understand. It's taking each of our behaviors and putting its own spin on them. It's learning and experimenting just like we are."
The being spun in what might have been excitement, creating a dazzling display of lights and colors that had the humans gasping in delight. Even some of the other species' representatives seemed captivated by the impromptu light show. When the chime sounded, ending the trial, Valresh made an unprecedented announcement. "The humans have successfully communicated with the entity."
What?
Jinan's membrane rippled in shock.
They established no formal exchange of information. They just bumbled about like fools.
"Did we not observe mutual learning?" Valresh asked. "Is that not the foundation of true communication?" The entity drifted closer to Elena, briefly matching the silver of her hair before dissipating in a shower of sparkling motes. She smiled, feeling oddly honored by the farewell gesture.
I still don't understand, Jinan said. How could such a simplistic approach succeed where our advanced methods failed?
Ren suggested gently. "We didn't try to force communication on our terms." Valresh's surface rippled in what Elena now definitely recognized as approval. Perhaps being a bit primitive is a good thing. What's wrong with having a little fun? The chamber filled with interconnected floating platforms, each holding what appeared to be pieces of machinery that could combine in various ways. Bridges of liquid metal formed and dissolved between them, making navigation treacherous. "The fourth trial requires cooperation," Valresh announced.
Here lay many incomplete mechanisms. Each species' knowledge will be needed.
Elena immediately noticed how the other delegations separated themselves, clustering on different platforms with their own kind. The Ku-Loth ignored every attempt at communication from others, while the Ardathi's natural harmonious nature seemed to war with their growing frustration at the trials. Ren said quietly,
"Did they even hear him? We're supposed to be working together."
Elena nodded. Years of rivalry and prejudice weren't easy to overcome. But as she studied the mechanisms, she noticed something interesting.
The components here are familiar. This piece here is similar to Mithrani technology, while that one resembles Ku-Loth design. The solutions require multiple species expertise,
Dr. Tanaka realized.
but they're all too proud to admit they need help.
Ren straightened his shoulders. Then we'll help them anyway. Without waiting for a response, he crossed one of the bridges to the nearest Ardathi platform. Excuse me, but I noticed you're having trouble with that connection. We saw something similar in our section. The Ardathi's vine-like appendages curled defensively at first, but Ren's genuine desire to help was hard to dismiss. Soon, he was deep in discussion with their engineering expert about possible solutions. Taking his cue, the other humans spread out across the platforms. Dr. Patel helped the Vor Collective modify their synchronization protocols. Dr. Tanaka shared insights about material stress tolerances with the Ku-Loth. Even Colonel Zhang found common ground with some of the more militant species over structural integrity requirements. This is not a group activity, High Scholar Jinan protested when Elena approached their platform. Each species must prove their own worth.
Says who?
Elena asked, genuinely curious.
Valresh literally said we need to work together. Besides, look at this component. It's clearly based on your people's quantum field generators. Who better to help us understand it?
The Ku-Loth's inner patterns shifted uncertainly. But we are in competition for the Precursor's legacy.
Are we? Or are we all part of the same galaxy, facing the same trial?
Elena smiled.
Whether we win or lose, we'll all learn more by working together than staying isolated.
Slowly, reluctantly, the barriers began to break down. The Ardathi's natural inclination toward harmony reasserted itself as they saw the humans freely sharing knowledge. Even the Ku-Loth eventually began offering technical insights to other groups, though they insisted it was merely to prevent catastrophically incorrect applications of their designs. The Mithrani delegation, watching from the chamber entrance where they'd been observing since their earlier withdrawal, finally spoke up.
This is unprecedented,
Ambassador Theksul declared.
No species has ever willingly shared such knowledge.
I wonder why that is, Ren asked, helping steady an Ardathi representative as they crossed between platforms. We're all trying to grow, to learn, to build a better future. Why do it alone when we can help each other?
Because
The ambassador seemed to struggle with the concept.
we must maintain our position, our status. Crabs in a bucket,
Elena called from across the chamber.
Look how much progress we've made just by working together for a few hours.
Indeed, mechanisms across multiple platforms had begun to align and function. While no group had completed their section entirely, the collaborative effort had yielded more progress than any individual attempt. When the chime sounded ending the trial, there was a notable difference in the chamber's atmosphere. Species that had barely acknowledged each other before were now engaged in technical discussions. The Ardathi were teaching others about harmonic resonance, while the Ku-Loth actually listened to suggestions about their quantum theories. I begin to understand, High Scholar Jinan said slowly. Sharing knowledge is not losing advantage. We see it as gaining friends, Ren finished with a smile. And there's no better advantage than that. Valresh and Kultreth exchanged looks that carried volumes of meaning in their rippling surfaces. Elena noticed that the next trial announcement didn't come immediately. The precursors were giving everyone time to continue their discussions. She smiled. watching Ren help coordinate between 3 different species trying to explain their technological principles to each other. It doesn't matter if anyone inherits the legacy. Perhaps there never was one to begin with. The precursors are here just to teach us that sharing is the greatest advancement of all. The chamber transformed into a vast obstacle course that defied physics itself. Platforms phased in and out of existence, gravity reversed at random intervals, and paths split into quantum superpositions where multiple routes existed simultaneously. "The final trial," Val Resch announced. Elena studied the ever-shifting landscape with wide eyes.
It's not even pretending to be possible, is it?
The laws of physics themselves reject these configurations, High Scholar Jinan observed. Success is literally impossible. The few remaining delegations began to withdraw. The Ardathi's harmonious nature couldn't cope with such chaos. The Vor Collective's synchronized movements fell apart trying to process multiple simultaneous realities. Even the Kuloth's legendary intelligence found no solution to undefined variables. "Well," Admiral Connors said after they were alone, "what now?"
What now?
Elena's eyes sparkled with excitement.
We're staring at literal quantum superposition in action. Every theoretical physicist on Earth would kill for an opportunity like this.
Dr. Tanaka was already setting up monitoring equipment.
The energy readings are fascinating. Each platform exists in multiple states at once, but somehow maintains coherence at macroscopic scales.
"We should take shifts," Ren suggested. "Not to even bother attempting it, but just because we have to see every configuration. Who knows what breakthroughs are hidden in there? Though I think Dr. Patel and Dr. Tanaka are more the experts on that side of things. There's a reason I didn't go to grad school like Mother wanted." The human delegation organized themselves into rotating teams. Some would rest while others explored, carefully documenting everything they encountered. They knew they couldn't succeed, but that didn't diminish their enthusiasm for discovery. Elena found herself walking on a path that existed in 3 places at once, each version slightly out of phase with the others.
The quantum uncertainty is visible to the naked eye. Do you realize what this means for our understanding of physics?
"Mom!" Ren called from a platform where gravity pointed sideways. "You might want to see this one. It looks kinda like the maze." They worked in shifts through the allocated time, each group building on the observations of others. Dr. Patel developed new theoretical models for quantum computation. Dr. Wilson studied the biological effects of existing in multiple states simultaneously. Even Colonel Zhang found military applications for controlled uncertainty fields. The other species watched from the chamber entrance, baffled by humanity's continued effort in the face of guaranteed failure.
I do not understand,
Ambassador Theksul said.
You know you cannot succeed. Why continue? Success isn't always about reaching the goal,
Dr. Garcia explained while taking readings of a time-dilated section.
Sometimes it's about what you learn along the way.
But you will fail, High Scholar Jinan insisted.
So?
Elena asked, genuinely puzzled by their concern.
We're getting to study technology that rewrites the laws of physics. Who cares if we can't finish the course? Every attempt teaches us something new about how it works.
Her enthusiasm proved contagious. Soon, other species representatives were asking questions about the humans' findings. The Kuoloth's scientific curiosity eventually overcame their pride as they discussed quantum theory with Dr. Patel. Even the Ardathi returned to observe the strange harmonies created by probability waves.
Remarkable,
Val Resch commented to Kultreth.
They know success is impossible, yet they continue with undiminished wonder.
Kultreth's scales rippled thoughtfully.
That is precisely why they are here.
The humans didn't hear this exchange, too absorbed in their exploration. They had long since stopped trying to complete the course, instead treating each attempt as an opportunity to study something new about the precursor technology. When the chime finally sounded, they were almost disappointed. Elena was in the middle of documenting a particularly interesting quantum phenomenon, while Ren's team had just discovered a new pattern in the platform phases.
Thank you.
Elena said to Valresh as they prepared to reconfigure the chamber.
We failed every trial, but it was an incredible experience. I'll be talking about it till the day I die.
Valresh's surface rippled in what might have been amusement, but they said nothing as they prepared to announce the trial's conclusion. The chamber returned to its original configuration as Coltret's massive form coiled through the air. Their draconic shape seemed to draw everyone's attention naturally upward, mercury-like scales rippling with complex patterns.
The trials are complete,
They announced.
Humanity alone has passed.
A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Elena blinked in surprise, certain she must have misheard. Even the other humans looked confused. That's impossible, High Scholar Jinan protested. They failed every challenge. They never solved the puzzle box, never reached the maze's center, never established formal communication protocols with the entity, never completed the cooperative mechanisms, and certainly never finished the obstacle course.
At what point did we say to solve anything?
Valresh asked, their humanoid form rippling with amusement.
All we did was present to you a puzzle box and gave you a cycle to interact with it.
The maze was meant to be explored, not conquered,
Coltreth continued.
The entity sought connection, not data exchange. The mechanisms were designed to be incomplete, and the obstacle course,
their scales shifted in what might have been a smile,
was never meant to be traversed.
Elena's eyes widened as understanding dawned.
The trials weren't testing our capabilities at all. You just wanted to see how we reacted to them?
Precisely.
Coltreth's form rippled with approval.
Our civilization nearly destroyed itself by becoming too focused on achievement. We forgot how to wonder, how to explore, how to learn purely for the joy of learning. We became so concerned with proving our superiority that we stopped growing entirely.
That is why we created these trials,
Valresh added.
not to find the most advanced species, but to find one that still has the spark of genuine curiosity. One that approaches the unknown not with pride or fear, but wonder.
The other delegations stirred uncomfortably as the precursors continued.
The Mithrani were so convinced of their superiority that they withdrew rather than risk failure,
Coltreth observed.
The Kuloth's brilliant minds could not accept that play might be more valuable than analysis. The Vor's perfect synchronization left no room for individual discovery. The Ardathi's harmony, while admirable, led them to retreat from chaos rather than embrace it.
But the humans,
Valresh's surface danced with apparent joy.
They approached each trial with genuine excitement about what they might learn, regardless of success or failure. They shared knowledge freely, helped others without expectation of reward, and wondered even in the face of absurdity. They even looked forward to sharing their discoveries on their return, of gifting their wonder to the rest of their people.
This is what we sought,
Coltreth declared.
Not a species to inherit our legacy, but one to remind the galaxy how to learn again. One whose wonder might rekindle the spark of curiosity in all.
Elena looked at her fellow humans, seeing her own amazement reflected in their faces. They had approached the trials assuming they couldn't win, focusing instead on the incredible opportunity to study precursor technology up close. That very assumption had somehow led them to victory.
I think I understand,
Ren said slowly.
It was always about being a kid again.
Yes, Valresh confirmed.
Advanced technology can be granted, knowledge can be shared,
but the desire to learn, to discover, to grow, that must come from within. You humans have proven you still possess that essential spark."
Elena couldn't stop laughing.
We thought we were the primitive ones. All this time, we were passing the trials because we didn't care about passing them.
The precursor surfaces rippled in shared amusement as the other delegations began to understand just how thoroughly they had misunderstood the true nature of the tests. 5 years later, Elena stood in front of another lecture hall, but this one was unlike any on Earth. The chamber's liquid metal walls rippled softly, and her students represented species from across the galaxy. Some floated, some swayed on vine-like appendages, some synchronized their movements in perfect harmony.
"The universe," she began with a smile, "is filled with wonders beyond counting."
The Santos Foundation for Galactic Learning had started small, just a few classrooms in a precursor-enhanced facility on Earth. But word spread quickly about the humans who taught not just knowledge, but wonder itself. Soon they had satellites on a dozen worlds, teaching everything from basic sciences to advanced precursor technology. The key was their approach. Every class started not with lectures or data, but with simple appreciation of the subject's beauty. Students were encouraged to play, to explore, to fail spectacularly, and learn from the experience. Elena watched a young Kuloth working with an Ardathi student, both absorbed in studying a miniature version of the quantum platforms from the trials. Their natural curiosity had been reawakened through exposure to humanity's infectious enthusiasm.
"Professor Santos?"
A Mithrani youth raised their hand, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago.
"Could we try the probability wave experiment again? I had an idea about the harmonics." "Of course,"
Elena beamed. These moments made everything worthwhile, seeing formerly proud species rediscover their childhood sense of wonder. In his own classroom down the hall, Ren was teaching what he called practical diplomacy, showing representatives from various species how to work together with handy tricks and tips he learned in all his years managing one of the few multiracial trade stations, and, of course, from his time in the fourth trial. The Foundation had even established an orphanage wing, taking in abandoned or displaced children from all species. There, youngsters could grow up maintaining their natural curiosity instead of having it trained out of them by rigid cultural expectations. "Remarkable progress," Valresh observed, their liquid metal form materializing beside Elena as she watched her students. "You've done more to unite the galaxy in 5 years than millennia of political maneuvering." Elena smiled.
"We just showed them what they'd forgotten, that learning should be a joy, not a competition, that working together multiplies discovery rather than dividing it."
"And that failing spectacularly is often more enlightening than succeeding boringly?" Valresh's surface rippled with amusement.
"Exactly,"
Elena laughed.
"Though I still can't believe that's why you chose us. We spent the whole trial thinking we were hopelessly outmatched."
"Why we chose you, Dr. Santos, and your son, whom was raised very well, and the other human representatives. It was that very assumption which freed you to focus on wonder rather than achievement," Valresh noted. "You saw marvels where others saw only tests to pass, a lesson that even your own people needed to take more to heart." The discussion was interrupted by excited shouts from the classroom. The Kuloth and Ardathi students had apparently discovered a way to have the cat exist both in and outside of the box at the same time, even when unobserved. Elena watched with pride as species that once looked down on each other now worked together, united by shared curiosity. The precursors hadn't just chosen humanity to inherit their legacy, they'd chosen them to help the galaxy remember how to learn again.
"You know,"
she said to Valresh,
"I think this is the real trial, helping others rediscover their sense of wonder. And it's one we'll gladly spend the rest of our lives working on."
Valresh's surface rippled in approval as they watched the next generation of galactic citizens learning joy. The Precursor's gift wasn't their advanced technology, it was wonderment.